Today on the show, we dive into some of the biggest rivalries in Canada, and I spill the beans on my top 10 list based off your suggestions. Now, before this episode actually starts and we talk and we do the intro, I do want to address small slip up I made last week in regards to our McDonald on the podcast. He's not the head coach, he's the assistant coach for the Barrhaven Scottish. But he's got a lot of talent. I still think he's going to be fantastic. I still think he's going to be a big asset for this club. But yeah, I made that small error. I just want to correct it. So if you're listening and you're going, Sean, you made that error last week. Why did you make it? I genuinely don't know. I don't know how it happened. But he's the assistant coach for the Barrhaven Scottish this year, which is super cool. He's also the assistant coach for the GGs. So he's a pretty cool guy. But we'll get into the episode. I just want to make that apology straight away, and we'll get into the top 10 biggest rivalries. Welcome back to Pitch Eye with myself, Sean Ryan Radio, the podcast focused on grassroots rugby across Canada. And today we're going through some of your suggestions on the biggest rivalries across Canada. Now, before we tackle this list, if you haven't heard, CB Rugby Coaching has launched Director of Rugby packages for clubs looking to build stronger rugby programs. A lot of clubs have players and passion, but what's missing is often structure, the coaching systems, the player pathways, and the long-term planning. This It helps clubs bring in professional level standards without the cost of a full-time director of rugby. And Curtis Bradford is the man behind this project, bringing experience from Germany Rugby, Leicester Tigers, Connacht and Toronto Arrows, and many, many more clubs. He's a couple of different tiers on this package for CB Rugby Coaching. There's gold, silver and bronze, but it's all dependent on what your club needs. If you want to know more information, just reach out to myself and I'll point you in the right direction. SeanRyanRadio@gmail.com. Super cool program. This guy is super knowledgeable, and if your club needs that structure, it's definitely a good shout to get involved and ask me about the contact details. But Curtis is a good man for it, and someday your club could be winning cups left, right, and center, even if it feels like it's not happening right now. All right, the list that everybody's been asking. Now, we're gonna go through it. I've picked 10 of these interesting ones that people have sent me, and a lot of it was trying to learn a bit more information about these clubs because one, I'm based here in Ontario. This is my third summer going to be covering the Marshall League and the McCormick Cup and all that sort of stuff. And I now have a better understanding of these clubs, a better understanding of how the rivalries work and stuff like that. So it's going to be a small bit tailored to Ontario. I've picked a few that have been quite interesting from other parts of the country. And I'm always trying to span out my knowledge of the rest of Canada as well in terms of their rivalries and their clubs and their culture and how it all operates. But I do want to just address that there might be a small bit of bias, and this is based off your suggestions. So even if there's other ones that I did not mention, or that also that weren't that didn't have a lot of information, or I wasn't 100% like sure of how the rivalry was so a big deal and should be in this top 10 list. That was another factor on this listing. Now I will be quoting from messages sent. I won't be addressing exactly who said them for confidentiality reasons or whatnot, because some of the stuff is few different fights and brawls or whatever. So I've kept that kind of out of it. But we'll dive straight into it just to make sure we're all in the same headspace. This is the top 10 list from me. And if there is other suggestions, let me know down in the comment section. But in number 10, I'm going to go with the Niagara Wasps versus the Sarnia Saints. So based on the account that sent me this message, we're both border towns, started years ago. And it was a PIF charity game that this all started. A high tackle was made by a Niagara, which resulted in a brawl, but always had good beers with Niagara after the game. Left the anger on the field. I've always enjoyed a game against Niagara. Games were always super close. A close second to Sarnia rival would be to Barrie. One of the games, the ref allowed two players to duke it out, and we circled up in the middle of the field. The two dukes duked. it out and had beers with each other after. So he's giving me two there on that account. But from that Niagara one, the reason it's in the top 10, and there's not a lot of information there besides a brawl happening at a charity game, which you just don't want to happen. And people do get riled up, but at a charity game, it's not appropriate, to be honest with you. But the reason I picked this one is because I was at a Niagara versus Sarnia game last year down in Sarnia, and you could tell there was that tension in there. You could tell there was a lot of passion. It was another charity game, strangely enough. But we didn't see any brawls. Everybody had a good time in the bar afterwards, and a great occasion. So we do like to see the rivalry on the pitch. We do like to see, people really getting stuck in and really wanting to win those games. But when it breaks out into fights, it's not a good sign to see. But that just shows the passion and the rivalry there as well. So that was kind of one of the reasons, as well as having that background knowledge of as a similar event to what happened on the day. Regarding the Barry one. They play each other this weekend. They're playing each other for kind of a pre matchup for the season ahead in Barry. So that's going to be a big game for the two of them, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that one unfolds as well. I'll be keeping a close eye. And if you want the results from the weekend, make sure you check out my Instagram. At Sean Ryan or at Sean_Ryan_radio. The link is in the bio. You can go through the link tree and I'll get you there. But that's just a thing of, you'll get the updates on the scores across the country as quickly as I can get them out. Now, in number 9, we're going to go for Moncton Black Tide versus Slammin' Salmon. And the account that sent me this message said, it has been really heated up lately. From our perspective, they used to be a bigger club than us, and back when we were only a C division side, they would stack their C division teams with a bunch of A guys and hammer us every time. That was pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, our club took some time to rebound, so we were just an exhibition side for a few years. I guess it was 3 years ago we had some guys move back home after playing away for a few years, and it lit fire under the guys to get the club back in the league and become a full-on B-side, because there was no C division in New Brunswick anymore. So that's one that's kind of building up. It might be a bit more one-sided kind of rivalry in a sense, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. It seems like if Moncton Black Tide get into the swing of things, get a bit more involved, is what I'm guessing. I believe it's Black Tide is the team, the underdogs here in this story. But it doesn't address this specifically. But I believe it's Moncton Black Tide, and somebody can quote me in the comments if I'm wrong here. But in either case, it's definitely like one side is a lot weaker and seems like, oh, they keep defeating us and they keep trashing us, and we're gonna prove them wrong. So it sounds like the peak is on the rise, and if it keeps going the way it's going, we should see a really strong rivalry come out of these two teams, and it might be a two-sided story as we get further into it. But this is definitely one that's still brewing, from my understanding. Now, in number 8, I've gone for the Regina Rogues and Campion grads. So from the account, they said the grads were dominating Saskatchewan rugby in the 70s and into the 80s. A lot of players weren't getting game time. So Carl Fix left the grads, began recruiting players largely from the grads, but from other clubs as well, to form the Regina Rogues RFC in 1981. I don't have the details on hand, but wouldn't be difficult to track down. But I've been involved with the Rogues since 2009, and since then, Regina Rugby has won the Rogues or Grads. Has been won by the Rogues or Grads, my apologies, all but 1 or 2 times. As well, Campion has won 15 provincial titles, and the Rogues have won 12. It's tamed down in recent years as the old guard has stepped away, but it's all Rogues since COVID. So this is definitely one that's been it's been around for a while. We're talking about the 70s. We're talking over 50 years of rivalry, which is incredible that it's so strong, and it's fixated on this one event happening, and it changes the course of history for this rivalry to brew. But very interesting to see that it's about the provincial titles 15 to 12, and the Rogues are catching up, which is interesting in itself. And it's a good rivalry in a sense. And just the way it stems, and it's so much history in it. It's a really cool story in that regard, and that's why I have it in at number 8. Now, number 7, I've gone with the Ottawa Irish versus the Ottawa Ospreys slash Indians. They originally were called the Indians, now they're called the Ospreys. The account says, well, the Irish and Indians were both founded around the same time when a bunch of players left the Beavers due to a variety of disagreements. In brackets, stories change depending on who you ask. Close brackets. As a result of the clubs being about the same age, that made it very easily for the competitive rivalry to be born. I play for the Ospreys and have heard dozens of stories of matches being completely called off due to an entire match turning into a brawl between teams, and the bad blood has boiled over the last 60 years. The clubs tend to flip-flop division positions every 10 years or so, with the Irish on top now and the Osprey Indians last divisional title in 2017. Because of the flip-flopping and the bad blood goes through the administration of both clubs, with coaches trying to poach and openly talk shit to each other at the Eastern Ontario Rugby Union meetings. As of recently, the last AGM with the Irish trying to kick us out of the Division 1 Eastern Ontario Rugby Union. I'm definitely missing a lot of stuff, but if you talk to anyone from the Ospreys or the Irish, they will tell you how much we hate each other. Now, I do apologize. I didn't realize the word shit was in there. So I hope no kids or nobody took offense to that. Um, but yeah, definitely a lot of history there. I've been to the grounds, so that's kind of why I've kind of rated a bit more. 60 years of history is kind of crazy too. And especially the fact that it's kind of led into an AGM meeting. Because they're on the same grounds. They're both at Twin Elm Park in Ottawa. You can imagine that rivalry is quite intense, even from the background of things, as he mentioned there with the AGM. But it's a lot of history, a lot of that. Will we see? There's a big question there because, as you said, it kind of flip flops over every 10 years. Will we see the Ospreys get back into the swing of things? Will we see them, become champions in 2027? Because that'll be 10 years. Who knows? Maybe this guy's going to predict it for me. But yeah, there's an interesting on that regard. Number 6, I've gone for Burnaby versus Capilano. And the account says, always been traditional rivals, mate. But there were some my apologies. But there were some alleged unregistered players, etc., in a playoff semi back in the early 2010s, and it jumped off from there. Both clubs traditionally play each other every year for Pink Day at CAPS in aid of cancer research, and there will be all 5 grades playing over the course of the day, with high hundreds of fans in the grounds. Probably my favourite memory of playing in Canada was playing Prems against Burnaby at home. Die hard Caps boy here. So definitely this is one that I really like, in a sense of, like, there is this rivalry, there is this kind of, undertone of unregistered players back many moons ago, and now it's kind of, we bring that rivalry, we do it to a charity game, and similar as we said for the Sarnia one, we bring it to a charity game. It's going to be passionate. It's all 5 grades playing each other, which is, that's a day out in itself. You want to be down there at the action. And it's definitely one that, even from reading it, that I want to just fly over there and just attend it. Just the way he's used the words and stuff like that. But yeah, really cool to kind of have that rivalry. And that was one of the ones that I thought it had to be in the top 10. I just shy of the top 5, because there was a few other ones that I felt needed to get there. But I think it's one definitely to take note of if you haven't heard of it before. Now, the top 5. Here it is. I will say again, I have Ontario bias, so there's going to be a lot of Ontario ones in this. But in these ones, we had more than one account say them to me, so that's another reason why these are in the top 5. It wasn't just one person said this, it was 2 or maybe 3 individuals. There's 1 or 2 of them that, like, I've been to the games and been around the action on and off the field. So this that's kind of giving you the inkling of why they're the top five. It's because they've been mentioned a lot, and because I think the stories behind them are quite intense. Now, for number five, Calgary Hornets versus the Calgary Canucks. Now, the account says, I could dig into it further for a more lengthy history, but within the last 5 years, the Canucks have hired a coach in 2022 that brought them an undefeated provincial championship. Problems between the club execs and the coach arose, causing the coach to quit. He was hired that offseason by the Hornets. That offseason, eight Alberta Cup players followed him to the Hornets, leaving the Canucks. That season, the Hornets knocked off the Canucks in the city finals and won the provincial championship. Since then, there's always an energy surrounding the games between the two clubs. Supporters have gotten into recent memory the patio at the rugby union having to be separated with sides allocated for each club. A game last year that was called off early due to ref losing control and players getting into a trading yellow cards 4 or 5 times on cheap shots. I know well before my time there has always been a bit of rivalry there, but in recent it has definitely heated back up. The two clubs have always competitive in the comp out here trading places on who comes out on top, but it's definitely a date that gets circled on the calendars. So that was an interesting thing. As I said, there's a few different accounts on this. On the second one, it's a bit shorter, but straight to the point. Mostly down to being the two biggest clubs in Calgary. Usually echoes down the divisions as well. Like the Knights and the Canucks are the two biggest teams in Division 3. Plus, the Canucks have a reputation of may or may not dropping players into the lower leagues. So that was the second account. And then the third account says every game between the top division, the stands are full, brings more fans to the CRU than any other games on the schedule. Years after year after year, these are the top two in Calgary. Both are the only clubs to field a team in all three divisions. The first division sides have met in the city final in the last 4 years in a row. The players are chirping. There's been fights break out on the fields and the stands, and we've had fans and coaches kicked out of the game. It's truly a battle every single time these two sides play at any division. There's no team either side would rather beat. So definitely from those accounts, and I do love getting a bit more accounts because you kind of get a different perspective on people, but it really nails it down of like how big this rivalry is. And look, we don't want to see, scraps between the players and all this. We don't want to see it, to be honest with you. But look, that's part of the part of the game. We get a bit heated. It happens in every sport where something breaks out. But for it to be so aggressive is another thing. But it's also has a positive light to it. We see that from these accounts, it seems that like the stands are full, people are at the games, they have it circled in their calendars. So there's a lot of positives to take out of these two sides. And it'll be, another year this year where they'll battle each other. And I think we're going to see, the same thing. But yeah, very interesting. As well as like a part of the country I wouldn't have been too familiar with until like last year, where I started kind of diving into the different provinces. But very interesting, and it felt very passionate. So it had to be it had to be in the top five for sure from the list that was given. Now in number four. As I said, all these accounts have a few, and this one definitely has a few as well. This is Markham Irish versus the Aurora Barbarians. Now, the first account says, from my earliest recollection in the very early 2000s and on, just intense, old school, often very dirty rugby with two of Ontario top sides in those years. They've been battling back and forth. There was one game that stands out in that time that encapsulated the rivalry where our best player was clotheslined and badly injured. Then years of just bad blood, intense rivalry. Watch a Markham Barbs game these years. The intensity is still there. Lots more to many stories, but that's the gist of it. Okay, fair enough. The second account says, "Hey man, honestly, when we were Markham, we always had beef with them. knocked us out in the playoffs a couple of times, and I think the Irish were the same. We beat them in 2013 to win our first cup after we merged, and we just had, or just always had problems with them. Our old boy Seven from the Irish effing hated them. LOL. We just kept meeting them in the playoffs and knocked each other out. Kind of a back and forth. And then the third account says their neighboring club and a lot of us play high school against each other, and a decent amount of guys have played each other each side. It's a friendly rivalry with, but there's a bunch of um individuals. Definitely not an appropriate word to say here. When they sing this their stupid song. You can imagine it's a B word. It's a B word. Okay, I'm just letting you know. But very interesting to kind of see that rivalry. I didn't actually know of this rivalry due to the fact that they haven't played each other in recent times. Um, because Markham has just moved up from last year. Well, they were in the championship last year, and Aurora were in the Premiership, so didn't get a chance to play them during the regular season. This year, they might play them in the McCormick Cup or the Fall Cup, depending on how everything lies out for them. Um, but yeah, if that game happens, I'll have to figure out a way to get down to see it. Um, but yeah, very interesting just to see the different different hate that's or different passion, I suppose is the word I should be using, between the two sides. And you don't want to see things getting like mentioned there, clotheslines. Um, and obviously the song is a different story, and I have heard it. McCormick Cup finals in 2024, where they won. I believe it was the Fall Cup they won, if I'm not mistaken. Or no, it wasn't. It was the Consolation Cup because the Fall Cup was won by Peterborough, if I'm not mistaken, against London St George. But in the Consolation Cup, they won against Burlington, and yeah, they just they um they had to sing that song at the end of the game. So don't remember the words because it's been a hot minute, but it definitely knew of people getting around and wanting to sing the song and everything like that. In at number three, this one there's only one account, but I've been to two of these games between these two sides. It's always been competitive, so that's why it's number three. Because I have a lot of respect for these two clubs, and they're you know as we say in the account, um, very competitive. So the account says there has been some players that have moved from Waterloo to Brantford and Brantford to Waterloo and vice versa. So there's some heat playing against your former team there. But a lot of the time, Waterloo and Brantford teams in high school will face each other to see who's going to the provincials and then getting scouted for university or college. Those players, a lot of the times, will be the best teams and be rivals or teammates there and want to win because they know them personally. Honestly, I think it really is because the quality coming out of both towns and being so close to each other just builds the hostility on the field and for everyone. But once the game is over and we get some beers together, it calms the rivalry down a little bit. I hope that gives you info you need to help you decide why this rivalry is the biggest in Ontario, if not the country. So I definitely think it's a big one. As the account says, it stems from the colleges, the universities, the high schools and stuff like that. And the the next one is similar enough story as well. But it's just I've seen them in the McCormick Cup doing the commentary and stuff like that. It wasn't a one-sided game. It could have been any. It could have been Waterloo winning that one. I think if they had won it, I definitely think it might have been second on this list. I think that would definitely put the flame under this rivalry a bit more. But it comes from the colleges, comes from the universities, comes from the high schools. So very interesting to see how it's already progressing up. They have two very strong um, sides. Could I say they're the two top teams in the country, in the province? For sure. I wouldn't be saying that was a an off the ball take, but yeah, seeing the two best teams as of right now battling each other, um, it's always an interesting one. I can't wait to see how they play out this season. Now, in number two, this one came up a few times. I have three accounts of this. And there's a lot of information here. The guys really gave me a lot here, so it's quite a lengthy part. But for number two, it's got to be the Ajax versus Oshawa. And the first account says, I think it goes back to the schools. All the players have known each other for a long time, and there is a strong high school programs and junior club programs. There's also a history of players migrating on occasion between the clubs. Ajax and Oshawa clubs are only 10-minute drive apart. The quality of rugby programs for minors and juniors to seniors create consistently good matchups. So that's the first one. The second one then says historically the two clubs don't like each other much due to the rivalry that naturally occurred from geographical locations as well as both teams being powerhouses in the past. Also, since the teams are so close geographically, there has been some politics from Oshawa stealing players from Ajax due to incentives. Many clubs do not like Oshawa due to their culture their over there. They have never played with much class, so it feeds it into it. It stems from the junior level. Uxbridge High School feeds into Oshawa, and the Dunbarton, my apologies, High School, who feeds into Ajax, has been powerhouse rugby schools in Lhasa for a long time. And the Uxbridge Dunbarton rivalry continues into the Oshawa Ajax, as well as the junior club rugby of U16, U18s. Usually, Ajax and Oshawa are the best teams in the East GTA, so the rivalry stems from the young. The rivalry is pretty big. Both teams honestly hate each other a lot. I'd say it's the biggest rivalry in the Marshall and Beach Scottish next, followed by Beach Quins. So he gave me his take on the rivalries to look at. And then the final account says, I played for Ajax when we won the McCormick Cup back in '98 when we were in Ontario B League at the time, but never played Oshawa as they were in the TRU, I believe. I'm from Glasgow, so it didn't mean much to me, but as I coached the U18 team, it was clear to me the boys hated each other. I think it all starts from most of the kids playing for Ajax Pickering teams like Dunbarton High School, who were always a good team, so they played Oshawa schools in Lhasa or the Ofsa. There there was always that tension. Personally, I dislike from my point of view was Oshawa hired a coach, not saying who, that's fair, who done the provincial teams, so would poach players being the odd player in from England and that's what made them stronger as a team, today. Another player went to coach Durham College and recruited again purely for Oshawa. So again, from my perspective as an Ajax coach and player, we never done that and purely recruited from high schools. Just my opinion, but honestly, it's a bit clearer. And now for the biggest rivalry. But before we get into that, I'm going to talk about what we just read because that was a lot of information between the two. Um, Very interesting. I think I got more of an Ajax perspective on this, so there's a small bit of Ajax biased here, from or more of opinions. I wouldn't say maybe biased, and maybe if there is an Oshawa player or coach or anybody who wants to get involved, do send something down in the comments and say your piece. But um, it definitely seems like it's a lot of rivalry, and just like reading over that, the high schools and even mentioning the high schools, it means that these two high schools are the top dogs there. From from the accounts that have said it. But yeah, definitely interesting to see the kind of international poaching as well, or the provincial poaching. So there's a lot of things that like affect, and I think yeah, I think it's interesting how the rivalry begins, but it's all those little bittery things of like, this coach was taking players or whatnot, and that's the perspective of it. Um, there hasn't been much, uh, you know, it's a rivalry really, but I think the accounts did much of the heavy lifting in this one. Um, and yeah, it's made it a bit more clear for me of why, and it's definitely I think definitely one of the bigger ones. I just need to see it in action, I think. I think once I see it in action, I definitely think it's probably the top one just from all these accounts. Um, but the top one I have right now is the fact is this is the biggest rivalry. This is the rivalry I've chosen as the top one based on your suggestions. If there is other ones that you want me to talk about, and I will talk about the ones that people had sent in to me that I will, honorably mention at the end. But if you do have ones that you're like, Sean, this one is way better, this one, should be in the top 10 list at least, um, do comment down below. Or you can always email me at seanryanradio@gmail.com. Now, for the biggest rivalry, as suggested by you, the Toronto Scottish versus Bambi Beach. So the account says basically, right, if I was halfway between signing for Bambi Beach this summer and Toronto Scottish, but in the chats, when I mentioned each other, they just absolutely hated each other. I think mainly just because they're two premier teams in Toronto, like the city itself, but the rivalry goes back ages. Like or even there's quite recently, there's a video there of the 2022 McCormick Cup final. It's on YouTube. So Bambi Beach beat Toronto Scottish, and at the full-time whistle, one of the Bambi Beach fans comes on, throws a point on the Toronto Scottish winger, and you can just see the Toronto Scottish winger just absolutely laying punches into him. It's crazy, but yeah, I heard there's been multiple bar fights and all in Toronto between the two teams throughout the years. So again, we don't want to see, fights like this happen. We don't want to see scraps. But I think this one especially having it happen in, Toronto is a big negative factor for um not just the clubs and like having that reputation, but for any other rugby clubs in Toronto. You're thinking the Nomads, you're thinking of the Toronto Saracens, you're thinking the Toronto Dragons. Um, for them to kind of like get the grounds and then like, oh yeah, we're gonna go to this bar, but maybe that bar has a bad reputation after the fact that Toronto Scottish and Bambi Beach had a fight in there. So that's something that we don't want to see. We don't want to see the fights going out there. As I said in previous podcast, look, it happens on the pitch. It happens on the pitch. It should stay on the pitch, and we should keep the passion at the grounds. And look, I think it's definitely they definitely threw different types of sub punches last year just based on positioning in terms of the grounding of like the scorelines and stuff. But I think this one is just it's so long. It's two biggest clubs in Toronto. And just having like something break out at a McCormick Cup or the finals as well, it's just not a good sight to see. But look, things happen. Don't get me wrong, but that's we don't want to see that. But it just also shows from the way this person has sent this. Well, they sent me a voice note, so that's why it's a small bit harder to read exactly, and I've just got the transcript from it. But it just shows that the intensity between these two sides, and it was one that had mentioned previously by the other account of like this one is definitely to look at too. Um, it's probably a game that I would probably like to be at, but also not be like to be at. There's a kind of a nice mix because of how heated this rivalry is. Has it gotten more in the years? I don't know, but because it was 2022, I still feel like that rivalry is quite heated anyway. Now, as you said, I'll do the honorable mentions. There's a lot of different ones that I think one I didn't get enough information on or wasn't convinced it was a top 10 pick. Some of these were just ones that I think were very close to being top 10. And other ones that I think you should just make note of for context. If you're looking at East West Coast and everywhere in between, it's good to know these rivalries as well. If you're coming over for the summer, if you want to play next year, it's cool. It's a cool way. So one of the ones to look at is the Ottawa Irish versus Boytown. They play on the same grounds. They're both at kind of the same level. But that's definitely one to look at. Boytown is now in the Marshall and been since last year. Ottawa Irish are still in the Eastern Ontario Rugby Union. So we won't see any matchups of that happening this year, but definitely one to be looking out for. And would love to know more about that one. Another one to look at is the Halifax RFC versus the Halifax Tars. Um, you know, based in Halifax. I believe Halifax Tars have more of an edge at the moment in terms of winning more of the cups and stuff like that. But as you can imagine, probably geographical location is probably the biggest thing for them. But there's probably a kind of switching teams and stuff like that too in there in that drama. Rocky Mountain Roads versus Elk Valley Bulls. From my understanding, the account that had mentioned this basically said that they were the only two teams battling each other from where they're located. They're kind of a bit outside of BC, but they're in BC. They have a third team now in the league that they have, or there's another team there. So they're not playing as frequently, but the rivalry between the two teams has just been kind of playing each other competitively for a good while. Brock versus Lindsay. This one is an interesting one in itself. I think it's definitely worth mentioning, and I probably think there's more to the story than what the commenter or the account had said to me. But basically, they're a blue collar, uh, workers, people. And yeah, it just kind of gets nitty gritty and a bit dirty in between. Barrhaven Scottish versus Bytown Blues. Similar enough. They're both in Ottawa. Uh, Not too much more information than that, in terms of like why, but it's Ottawa. It's a very smaller group, and they're quite closer together in terms of competition. So that rivalry kind of pops off a bit more there. Another one, university level, and I think this is definitely one to be kind of highlighted as the one of the biggest ones in university, is Guelph versus Queens in the OUA. Think the commentator had said 10 of the 11 finals for the OUA have been these two teams. Um, which is kind of crazy stat, but they are I would consider them the top teams in Ontario for the university level. And this one, I will say, it was definitely a 11th place one, which is the Stratford Black Swans versus Fergus Highlands. Um, it's definitely 11th place. The problem with it this year is that they won't play each other in the regular season, as the Highlands have moved over to the TRU and the Stratford Black Swans are in the NRU. But as mentioned by the account, they could be playing each other in a friendly. And essentially, they play for a cup called the Calcutta Cup. It's also something I want to know a bit more about, of why they went for that name. Similar to the Scotland England game, the first ever international game, the Calcutta Cup, but they call their cup the Calcutta Cup. Um, the one question I would ask if somebody does know is, what's the reason for calling it the Calcutta Cup? Because in my head straight away, my head went to, because they said as well, my apologies, they said as well that the coaches were very good mates and their sons were at the same kind of age bracket and stuff like that. So there's kind of that element to it too. Um, but the Scottish English side of things, of why the Calcutta Cup, are they Scottish and English backgrounds? Is that involved in it? That was a question I wanted to ask about that one. But yeah, it's definitely one to look at, just on the way they've kind of created into a tournament, kind of created into a cup, which is kind of cool too. Old School Valley versus Halifax Tars. Uh, didn't get too much information on this. I feel like there's a bit more to be said, but yeah, both in Nova Scotia. Barry versus Bound Beach. This is an interesting one. There's definitely been the account that had talked to me talked a lot about it, and I felt like definitely it should be up there. But I felt the other ones just had a bit more grit in it to them. But yeah, it's kind of a country boys versus the cottage boys kind of matchup, where people from Toronto going up north to kind of Barrie and Orillia and kind of further up north, just cottages. Um, but yeah, I think that rivalry is kind of that way. They're kind of on two different levels in terms of, one's in the TRU, the other one's in the Marshall. So they won't play each other's A sides, but maybe Barry might meet Bammy Beach's third team, which is in the TRU. Um, UBCO versus Alberta, in brackets the whole province. Interesting one. Um, don't know too much about it in terms of it. It's more based on the university level. It's something I'm still learning as such. So I don't know the ins and outs of it. But if somebody knows why there's rivalry between Alberta and the UBCO, do let me know. Uh, UNB versus MTA, New Brunswick rivalry between universities. Saskatchewan Wild Oats versus the Badgers. This one was I definitely considered putting this one in the top 10 due to the fact that the accountant told me that there's a court case that they study at law school about these two teams, which is kind of crazy that it's escalated to that level. But very interesting. We have the Valley versus the Tars, another Nova Scotia one. Merloma versus UBCO, another one from the West Coast. And then we have two ones that I think we should mention and make a big deal about. One of them being the Sawmen versus a beer. I do have a few Sawmen fans on this, and they, you know what, they won the TRU this year, and yeah, they have a rivalry against beer. The account also says that the beer always loses, the Sawmen always win. So that was kind of a funny one. And last but not least, this one is I think this rivalry is growing so fast. It's so big. You know what? I think it should be number one. I think it should be number one because of how this rivalry is just growing and growing. And it started last year. It started last year from the start of the season. This rivalry just started growing. And now it's probably, I would think, if I didn't just do a full list on the top 10, I think this rivalry is going to be number one. Give it the end of the season because that rivalry is Niagara Wasps versus Sean Ryan Radio. But no, that was one that was said to me, and I thought it was quite funny. I had to mention it. But yeah, they were the ones that were mentioned to me. Now, if there is other ones, as I said, do comment them down below, or you can just message them on to me. But I prefer you to comment so other people can see and learn a bit more about the culture that we have here in Canada and the rugby scene. And I think that's one thing that we need to look at as a whole is understanding the culture, understanding these little things that happen in between rivalries and clubs and whatnot. And that's my aim of the game. So. If you enjoyed it, make sure you follow or subscribe, depending on where you are listening and watching. You can find me at Instagram, Sean_Ryan_radio. If you want to help me cover Canadian rugby even more, you can show your support on Ko-Fi. Every bit helps in the podcast. The link is in the description. Next episode, some people were asking me, like, Sean, you should do this. And I'm thinking, if I get enough responses, I'll do it. If not, I'll have to think of something else, maybe make predictions or reflect on the results from the weekend because we do have a few games happening this weekend. But people wanted for me to talk about players that should be noteworthy this season from the Marshall and in Ontario. But we might do a whole list. So I'm gonna put something on my story earlier in the week so I can kind of build a script and get your accounts of why this person should be there. But until then, I'm Sean Ryan, or Sean Ryan Radio, whichever way you want to say it, and this has been Pitchside. Boom.